Chapter 17. Marian bolted back into Sherwood Forest as fast as her feet could carry her, which wasn't as fast as she would have liked, seeing as it was difficult to run while lugging a large pile of gold in your cloak. Behind her, she heard shouts coming from the carriage, Sir Hiss's commands to chase her down, followed by a loud crashing sound as the heavy rhino guards charged through the bushes in pursuit. She pressed on, heart in her throat, her mind racing with indecision. What was she going to do? She didn't want to drop the gold, not after she'd already risked so much to acquire it. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't go on like this. She was losing too much ground. Her heart racing, her eyes darted around the forest, looking for something, anything, that could serve as a hiding spot. She was about to give up when she spotted a gnarly old oak tree with a rotted-out hole in its trunk just ahead. It wasn't perfect, but it might serve. Quickly, she ran over to it and dumped the gold into the hole, then threw some dead leaves on top of it before taking off in the other direction, now able to increase her speed. She dashed through the woods, trying to keep track of each twist and turn. She didn't want to succeed in losing the guards only to find herself lost in the forest. Straining to listen, she realized she could no longer hear them behind her. Maybe she was all right. She allowed herself to slow her pace, sucking in much-needed breaths as she stepped into a clearing. Her side hurt from running and her vision was a little spotty. She glanced behind her. Had she managed to outrun them? Was she actually safe? Suddenly, she heard a noise. She whirled around, horrified to realize 2 rhinos had entered the clearing. They were brandishing sharp-looking spears. She tried to back away, only to find 2 more emerging behind her, the 4 of them effectively surrounding her on all sides. She cried out in dismay. This was not good at all. The rhinos stepped closer, lowering their spears so the sharp ends pointed towards her. "Stop in the name of Prince John," one of them barked, "or we will run you through." Marian's shoulders slumped in defeat. So much for escaping. She was trapped, outnumbered, and without a weapon. The best she could hope for was to try to talk her way out of this, and that didn't leave her with much hope at all. "Easy, boys," she began, her voice still shaking. "There must be some mistake. I was just out for a stroll. I meant you know—" The lead rhino grunted loudly, cutting her off. He motioned for the others to close in. She squeaked in alarm, holding up her paws in surrender, her life flashing before her eyes. What were they going to do? Would they simply end her? Or would they wait for Prince John and Sir Hiss to arrive to pass the sentence? Her mind went back to Robin and the promise she'd made to him to be careful. What would he think when he learned of her fate? "Oh, Robin," she thought miserably, "perhaps you were right all along." But just as she was about to accept her lot, a loud screeching sound pierced the night air. The rhinos turned surprised, just in time to see a dark-cloaked figure entering the clearing. The lead rhino turned to face the newcomer, holding out his spear. But the figure drew a sharp-looking sword from their belt, slashing at the spear, and easily knocking it out of the rhino's grip. The rhino bellowed in rage, charging at the figure with full force, and Marian was afraid he'd flatten them. But just before he reached the stranger, they ducked down, sweeping out a leg and slamming it into the rhinos. With a scream, the rhino toppled over, falling directly into the second guard, who was right behind him, and who ended up doing the same to the third. One by one, the rhinos fell into one another, their spears clattering to the forest floor. A moment later, Marian felt a shadow cross over her. She looked up to find the figure looming above. "Come on, dearie," they said, holding out a wing. "Let's get you out of here." Marian gaped. "Lady Cluck?" she whispered, shocked beyond belief. The figure reached for her hood, pulling it back to reveal her beak. Just for a moment, but it was enough for Marian to recognize her. Lady Cluck, her own nursemaid, Lady Cluck. had somehow just taken out Prince George's guards. Her eyes caught movement behind her. The rhinos were scrambling to their feet, grabbing their spears. They didn't have much time. She grabbed Cluck's wing and allowed her lady-in-waiting to pull her up. Then the two of them sprinted back into the forest. Behind her, she could hear Prince John screaming at his men, demanding to know how they could have let her get away. "Come on," Cluck urged. "We need to find a place to hide." She followed her attendant back out of the forest and through a grassy field. Before long, they came to a small barn cut into the side of a hill. Cluck ran to the barn door, yanked it open, and ushered Marion inside. Once they were both in, the chicken slammed the door closed and locked it behind her. Then she leaned over, wings on her legs, her breath coming in large gasps. "Well, that's the most running I've had to do in a while," she declared, fanning herself with her wing. Marion nodded, still trying to reclaim her own breath. Once she turned to her attendant, looking at her with wondering eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't come—" Her voice trailed off. She didn't want to say what she'd feared. Then she squinted. "But how did you—" "Find you?" Cluck suggested. Then she shrugged. "I got lucky, I suppose. When you didn't return to the castle, I grew worried and came out to look for you." She scowled. "And let me tell you, it wasn't exactly a bundle of joy to traipse through the cobweb-filled secret passageways to get out of the castle. If you're going to be using that on a regular basis, we're going to need to do a deep cleaning." She sniffed disgustedly, and Marion couldn't help a small giggle as she tried to picture the prim and proper Cluck, swatting at cobwebs and yelling at spiders as she made her way down the stairs. "You're lucky you didn't get lost down there," she told her lady-in-waiting. "It can be tricky if you don't know your way." "Bah! I have always had a good sense of direction," Cluck replied. "I found my way out and went straight to Robin's home, only to learn it was abandoned. At that point, I started to get even more worried. I was on my way back to the castle when I heard the commotion." She gave Marion a knowing look. "And if I didn't know one thing, it's that if there's commotion, the mischievous Marion and her little feisty fox friend are usually involved." Marion felt her shoulders droop at the mention of Robin. Cluck wasn't wrong. Back in the old days, Robin had always joined her on her escapades. The wilder, the better. But that was then, and now she was on her own. Well, until her former nursemaid had made a surprise appearance, that was. "Thank you for rescuing me," she said again. Her brow crinkled as she remembered. "The way you took out those guards? How did you do that?" Cluck gave her a sly grin. "Years of training," she told her. "Not that I've had to use it much lately, but it does tend to stay with you." "What do you mean? What training?" Marion cocked her head in confusion. In question. "Since when does a nursemaid undergo combat training?" "When she's not actually a nursemaid," Cluck replied with a grin. "Or at least not just a nursemaid," she shrugged. "I suppose it's time you knew. But I'm also a knight, trained by King Richard himself long before he came to England as a child." "What?" Marion stared at her in shock. "How did I not know this?" But even as she said the words, realization began to fall over her. Puzzle pieces coming together in fragmented memories from childhood, of times she'd woken in the middle of the night to find Cluck slipping back into her chambers, covered in dirt and grime. When questioned, her nursemaid would claim that she had been out visiting her country relatives. Had she actually been serving the realm the whole time? "When you first came to the castle as a child, your uncle worried about keeping you safe," Cluck exclaimed. "He was very busy with matters of the court and needed someone to keep an eye on you at all times. So he assigned me to you, under the guise of a nursemaid, to watch over you and protect you by any means necessary." The chicken smiled. "I was happy to do it, to serve my king, and over the years, I grew rather fond of you as well. Even if you were a bit of a mischievous minx," she added with a wink. Marion gave a low whistle. And all this time I thought you were so prim and proper. And I still am, Cluck protested haughtily. You can be both, you know, proper and deadly. She pulled her sword from her belt and slashed it through the air with one wing while feigning to hold a cup of tea in the other. Marion giggled again. Well, I'm glad you're on my side, she declared. I mean, the way you took out those rhinos, they didn't even know what hit them. Please, those grunts? Cluck waved her off. More bronze than brains. Makes it easy. But she looked pleased by the compliment all the same. A sudden thought came to Marion. Can you teach me? She asked. To fight, I mean. Like you. Cluck gave her a disapproving look. Now, why would you want to do that? She asked. So I could take care of myself, Marion replied. I mean, you saw me out there. What if the next time you aren't around? Next time? Cluck raised an eyebrow. Do you see yourself tangling with Prince John's guards on a regular basis? Marion felt her cheeks heat. Not intentionally, but what happened out there, Marion? Cluck asked. Why were they after you like that? I know you snuck out of the castle, but that seems a rather extreme reaction even for them. Marion sighed. It had nothing to do with me leaving the castle, she admitted. In fact, I don't even think they knew it was me. I was disguised the whole time. Only Sir Hiss saw me up close, and you know how snakes have terrible eyesight. Cluck clicked her beak. So then, what did you do to make them so mad? She asked. Marion stared at the barn floor, wondering if she should make something up. Something not quite as bad, but in the end, she decided to come clean. Well, I might have taken a little gold, she admitted, from Prince George's carriage. What? Cluck stared at her, incredulous, not that Marion could blame her. In hindsight, it had been a move enriched by wisdom. You robbed Prince John? I didn't rob him exactly, she protested. I just borrowed from someone who could afford it. She made a face. Besides, he robbed it from the citizens of Nottingham to begin with, calling it taxes, but he took from far more from his fair share, he shrugged. So I thought, well, I'd redistribute things a bit. Cluck shook her head in disbelief. Did Robin put you up to this? She asked suspiciously. It sounds like one of his harebrained schemes. No, Marion said sadly. Once again feeling the ache deep inside at the mention of the outlaw's name. Lady Cluck wasn't wrong to assume either. In the past, Robin would have been the first to come up with such a wild plan. But now, he had nothing to do with it, she said. In fact, he made it quite clear he didn't want to help me at all. She hung her head, reliving the moment of walking away from her best friend. It still hurt, more than she wanted to admit. She felt a wing on her arm and looked up to see Cluck giving her a sympathetic look. I'm sorry to hear that, she said, though I am sure he had his reasons. He did, and I get it, Marion said, trying not to choke on her words. But all the reasons in the world won't fill the empty bellies of the citizens of Nottingham. She paused, waiting for Cluck to scold her, to tell her she was playing a dangerous game and needed to stop before something worse happened. But to her surprise, the chicken nodded slowly and asked, Where is the gold now? I left it in a tree, Marion said, not far from where you found me. I covered it with leaves. I'm sure no one's found it. I thought tonight I could sneak back into the forest and retrieve it. Then I could bring it to the village of Nottingham while everyone slept. I'd leave some at every house, and when they wake up in the morning, they'll find it. I see, Cluck said, and if you're caught, then I'm caught, Marion replied. But at least I will have been caught doing something. Cluck, I can't just sit around in the castle, knowing children are going to bed hungry. I have to at least try. Cluck gave her a rueful look. You're right, she said. I am? Marion held her breath. Look, I'm not going to tell you I like it. You're putting yourself in danger like this. But how can I, in good conscience, stop you from doing something so selfless and good? The chicken smiled at Marion. It's what your uncle would have wanted. Marion felt a warmth rise inside of her at that. King Richard might be dead, But if she could keep his legacy alive, even in a small way. Thank you for understanding, she said. It means a lot. Oh, I'm not just understanding, Lady Cluck corrected, a twinkle in her eye. I'm helping you do it. Hope leapt inside of Marion. Really? You'll help me? Richard tasked me with keeping you safe, Cluck reminded her. So I suppose I'd have no choice in the matter. She winked at Marion. Also, I will teach you how to fight. If you're going to throw yourself into danger on a regular basis, you might as well be prepared.